So a lot of people, when they think about the 4-year cycle for Bitcoin, I sort of think about it like this. The major lows come near the end of the midterm year. You have the end of 2014, really early 2015, the end of 2018, and the end of 2022. So the 4-year cycle in this case is just the lows happen approximately every 4 years, right? But this is not unique to Bitcoin. Even though it might feel like it is, it's actually not. If we go back in time with the S&P 500, back to the 1970s, you'll notice the same thing, right? I mean, approximately every 4 years, right? I mean, look at this one, 1966, 1970, 1974, 1978, 1978 is right here. And then you have another major low, 1982. I mean, every 4 years, it seems like you find weakness in the stock market, and that ends up being a major low that then holds for a while. I mean, if you go back 4 more years before 1966, you have, guess what? 1962, right? So the 4-year cycle is something that I actually think exists outside of crypto. The main thing that we're trying to decipher right now is, are we in a left translated cycle or a right translated cycle, right? I think that is the key question that we should be asking ourselves. To some degree, I do act deterministically about the next major cycle low. I think the next major cycle low for Bitcoin will be either at the end of 2020. I mean, it could be mid 2026, the end of 2026, could be early 2027. The high is dependent on, of course, whether this is a left translated cycle or a right translated cycle, right? So a right translated cycle is all that we've ever known in crypto, right? Every cycle that we've had so far has been right translated. And what right translated means is that we go up for 3 years and down for 1, up for 3, down for 1, right? Over here, up for 3, down for 1. So everything we've seen so far has been a right translated cycle. We have not seen a left translated cycle. So for the S&P, again, if you go back to the 1970s, some of these were right translated cycles, some of them were left translated cycles, right? So some of them went up for 3 years, right? 1962 to 1965, and then you had basically a 1-year bear market. But the next cycle after that was only up for 2 years and down for 2 and up for 2 and down for 2, right? So you could argue that these were 4-year cycles in the 1970s, as long as you measure it from the low. The thing that changed was the high. Was it right translated? This was right translated. These two were left translated. So that's, I think, effectively, how I think a lot of people should think about the market cycles with Bitcoin. I do think the cycle is intact. I mean, I think the next low will be most likely, near the end of 2026. The question is it a left translated cycle or is it a right translated cycle? And that's what I've spent a lot of time talking about over the last few months.
And just to confirm, the left translated cycle pretty much means the top is already in?
Yeah. So if Bitcoin goes higher, if Bitcoin puts in a new all-time high, then I think this would be a right translated cycle, right? Yeah. Like if Bitcoin goes above 109, like let's say it goes to 110K, then I think history will show that it's just another right translated cycle. The only way, in my opinion, at this point that it's left translated is if the top is already in. Yeah, so basically, what I think, if it's a left translated, we should find a lower high this month, okay? So it's sort of an if-then statement. If Bitcoin puts in a new high, if it can go higher in May, I think it could run a lot longer. I think it could, potentially do what it always does and run till Q4. If this is a lower high, if May is a lower high, and we're unable to put in a higher high over the next 2 weeks, then unfortunately, I think the odds of a left translated cycle would go up a lot. And it's not like there's no evidence for it. I mean, at the end of the day, bears sound smart, bulls make money. So if a macro scale, it's better to be bullish than bearish. So I really do. I think it's important to remember that, right? And even a left translated cycle in a couple of years, a few years, no one's going to care anyways, because we'll probably be at new all-time highs regardless. Just for the sake of completeness, at this point, we haven't necessarily removed the idea that we're not just repeating what happened last year, right? Where we had a lower high in May, right? I mean, is this just a lower high in May? I hope it's not, right? I mean, I would certainly benefit more at this point if Bitcoin were to just break out. The great thing about this whole cycle theory stuff with right translated and left translated, I'm of the opinion, and I said this back in January and February, right? And back then, I thought there would be a lot of weakness between February options expiration and March options expiration, and there was. But what I said back then was, even if it is left translated, it's probably not going to be obvious until like the fourth quarter of the year. And the reason for that is because all us crypto guys know our right translated cycles. Basically, everyone's just going to assume it's right translated cycle until proven otherwise. Even if Bitcoin does come back down into Q3, it'll still likely go back up again, right? And, the market will keep trying to make all-time highs for, I think a decent portion of the year, even if it is left translated. So that's kind of how I'm navigating it, right? Like I'm basically saying, all right, I hope that Bitcoin breaks out to a higher high, but if we just keep on going month after month without a higher high, then by Q3, I'll probably be forced to assume it's a left translated cycle. I mean, we should talk about what would cause that, right? I mean, the main things that historically cause left translated cycles are when either inflation is ill-behaved or the labor market is ill-behaved. We just got CPI today and it came in at 2.3%. So that's good news, right? That's good news. We want inflation to go down. The main uncertainty is, will the labor market remain well-behaved, right? Are we going to see layoffs pick up or not? So far, they haven't. So far, initial claims are really, really low. And the main question with inflation, I guess, are how will tariffs affect things? I've actually been in the disinflationary camp for years. Like I've been under the impression that inflation will just drop. And the reason for that is because of the Fed funds rate. I think the Fed funds rate is currently higher than the neutral rate, which is the neutral rate being whenever the Fed funds rate is above it, the economy slows down. Whenever it's below it, the economy expands. And so because of that, I think we'll just see the disinflationary impulse continue. The only thing I think that can throw that into disarray is if you get these artificial price hikes in a lot of goods and services that are just caused by these tariffs, that you basically just snap your finger and then everything's 20% higher, right?
But could we theoretically reject all-time high in May and then QT ends, which is more favorable for crypto, and then break all-time high later this year? Or do you think it's now or never?
Yeah, no, you could. I mean, basically you're saying, could we just do the same thing we did in 2024 and 2023, right? Like why can't we just consolidate for the summer and then break out in Q4 is essentially what you're saying. So yes, and that's the reason why I'm saying, like, I don't think there's a need to panic here, because even if we get rejected and we go back down, I still think you will likely come back up here, later this year, right? And then that would be kind of the time to make a decision. And I think the only way we're going to figure out if it's going to break out or not will basically just be keeping an eye on the macro, right? I think the macro is the only thing that would really affect things, because, I mean, normally the market doesn't need a reason to go up, right? Markets just go up because they're never going to stop printing money. They need a reason to go down. And the only thing that I'm looking at that is cause for concern is just the unemployment rate. It has been trending up for a little while. And, that's sort of the main concern here is what's going to happen with the labor market. Because you can see for like all of Bitcoin's history, the unemployment rate has essentially gone down with the exception of the pandemic. This is the only thing that would cause, in my opinion, a left translated cycle. And that's why I spend so much time thinking about it and talking about it, is because we want to see the unemployment rate kind of like come back down, right? Like that's what we would like to see. If we're just breaking higher here, then that's what could send Bitcoin back down if the unemployment rate doesn't continue to get that move up. There's an interesting pattern that happened in 2019. I've talked about it a few times. I've made the 2019 comparison since like 2021, basically. And the reason is because of monetary policy, right? If you look at quantitative tightening, which you guys mentioned earlier, we've been in QT for the last several years, just like we were over here in 2018 and 2019. And it could follow that pattern that you just said, where it puts in a lower low and then maybe it breaks out in Q4. What's interesting is that this whole thing has been like a 10x thing of what we saw in 2019, at least as measured from some of these lows, where like if you look at a price label, this low by Bitcoin, when the death cross occurred, when the 50-day SMA crossed below the 200-day, was at 7,300. And then we saw Bitcoin rally up to 10.5K, right? And we basically just watched the same exact thing happen, just a 10x multiple, right? Now you have, instead of 7,300, right, you have 73,000, right? And it occurred right when the death cross. And then guess where Bitcoin just rallied to? 105K, which is just 10x times 10.5K. What happened back then is that you did get a lower low, but there still wasn't a recession, right? So even if you had a lower low here in the 60s in, say, August, September, I still don't necessarily think that a recession or a big recession has to be baked in. The market was able to continue on, and then it was just simply this pandemic-induced recession where it crashed the markets, right? Like if you look at the unemployment rate, how could Bitcoin not ignore it when you have the unemployment rate going from 3.5% to 15% practically overnight, right? That's a recession, right? That's a recession. And so it couldn't ignore it anymore. So yeah, I mean, like, I think you're right. I mean, I think if it does get rejected here and it goes lower, you could still have a breakout in Q4. I think it's going to depend on what the labor market's doing by then. So this is how I see the altcoin market. I'm sure you guys have seen this chart, right? These are total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. So you're basically just looking at the relative valuation of altcoins against Bitcoin. Essentially, I assume, whether I'm right or not, history will show, right? But I assume that altcoins are oscillators at best, meaning that best case scenario is they bottom down here.
That's pretty scary. That's a big jump from where we're at now. And I think will cause a lot of pain.
What's that in percentage terms right now?
Probably about 30%. Yeah, 34%. Okay. But again, I mean, the good news is it could happen on a Bitcoin rally or a Bitcoin dump, right? It doesn't have to be a Bitcoin dump. It could happen on a Bitcoin rally for all we know, right? I think that alt will continue to be devalued against Bitcoin. Now, the thing that's interesting is if you look at this chart, right, and you say that, they're oscillators at best, when they're up here, no one ever thinks they're going to go down here, right? No one ever thinks it. Like, it's always like, there's no way that alts are ever going to do that poorly against Bitcoin, but then they always do. And I made the same sort of suggestion with Ethereum, right? If you look at Ethereum dominance, one of the things I said back in 2021 was that Ethereum dominance would very likely come back down to the range lows, right? So when ETH dominance is up here, no one thinks it's going to go down here. And when it's down here, no one ever thinks it's going to go back up here. And you can see that ETH dominance just had a really big rally after it swept the same low from the last cycle, right? That's where it got this big rally from. I'm satisfied with the devaluation of Ethereum. Like, I don't think ETH Bitcoin has to go lower at this point. And by the way, this rally only occurred after ETH went home. I think that Ethereum has been devalued enough. Okay, I'm not bearish on ETH Bitcoin anymore. So yeah, if you look at ETH dominance, what happened last cycle when it bottomed is that it got a really big rally, right? It got a major rally, and then it actually came back down. You see that? It came back down a few months later. Again, for me, because Ethereum went home, I took my bear goggles off on the ETH dominance Bitcoin pairs. Like, I forced myself to take the bear goggles off. Like, I don't think it has to go lower, and I don't want to remain deterministic about Ethereum going lower in its Bitcoin pair. The way that alts would go home, like Ethereum did, is if Ethereum gets a similar pullback, right? Where it drops back down. It could be a higher low, could be a double bottom, right? But whatever it is, I think if Ethereum sees that weakness, I think that alts would then go down to their range lows. So basically, I think that Ethereum front-loaded its losses against Bitcoin. I think alts are sort of backloading their losses against Bitcoin. They're basically trying to hold on for as long as possible until people just give up, right? And so if you look at the 20-week SMA, 21-week EMA of alt Bitcoin pairs, I mean, they made a very similar move in sort of May of 2024, right? This is a very similar move up to that 21-week EMA. And then ultimately they just got rejected and then put in a new low in June. And then they put in a lower low in November. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, is that alts are going to continue to sort of track this trend line, right? So if you look at this trend line, alt Bitcoin pairs have been tracking it very closely for really since like 2023. Every time they sell off, they basically find support at this trend line. In the 2017 cycle, you can see that alts hit 0.25 in November. I think the same thing has to happen for alts. If you look at the altcoin market in 2017, it hit 0.25 in November. It was the last week of October, but if you look at the daily time frame, it was November of 2017. Look at what happened last year by alt Bitcoin pairs. When did they bottom for the year? November. When did they bottom the year before? Right? It was November, right? And then they rallied, right? This was the November rally. I think that alts will likely put in another low in June, and then probably a final low potentially as late as November. They come back up here, they hang around the 20-week SMA for a little while, they go down into June, they bounce back up into the dog days of the summer, they collapse down to the range lows by October, and then you get a big move back up. I think the odds of us going back up to the range highs go up a lot if we first go to the range lows. I would say that. I think that the reason this cycle has been so brutal is because people keep prematurely calling alt season. But if you look in history, The two big alt seasons we had in the last two cycles only occurred after alts went all the way down here, right? That's when the big move by alts occurred, right? That's when the big move occurred. And until you see that, I don't think you get a big move. I think you can have some moves. I'm not saying that you can't make money on altcoins. I just think that they're all going to be faded until they go to the range lows. And maybe the way that happens is we get a repeat of last year where altcoins sort of fade into the summer. Right now, Ethereum is doing really well. Again, in order to get alt season, ETH Bitcoin has to bottom. We've already had a really big move by Ethereum to the upside. There's a chance it's bottomed. But in order to confirm that it's bottomed, you're going to get a pullback at some point, and then you wait for a double bottom or a higher low. And I think when you get that, then you could theoretically have an alt season. But until that time, I think there's still some to prove.
Do you think ETH can go back up to where it was 0.09-ish?
Yeah, it's tough call. I mean, it kind of depends on if it's a right translated cycle or not, right? If it's a right translated cycle, then, I mean, anything's possible, right? I mean, I'm not going to say that, you can't see something like that. If it's a left translated cycle and Bitcoin's top is already in, then likely Ethereum won't get as impressive of a rally. Even in a left translated cycle, Ethereum could still go to an all-time high. And the reason I say that is because normally Ethereum's big moves in past market cycles have always occurred after the Bitcoin top was in. The main move in 2018 was a few weeks after Bitcoin had topped. The main move in 2021 was after Bitcoin had topped in April. So there's always a chance that could happen. There's a butterfly harmonic that actually has that pattern where basically Ethereum follows that exact path, and it's been following it for the last 3 to 4 years. I could see that happening. I think the main thing that I'm thinking about with Ethereum right now is this sufficient, right? Is this sufficient of a drop? And the reason is, if you look at the regression band, it went home, right? Like, so that's why I actually wanted to include more ETH in my portfolio, because I'm like, well, I mean, it finally did this thing that I've been going on about for years. So what I'm hoping for now, I'm hoping that Ethereum can break out here. But I mean, I would be lying if I said I didn't have a couple concerns, right? It still has to get through here, right? It still has to get through this, back testing this. And up until now, it hasn't necessarily proven that it's not still a bear market. One of the things to note is if you look at Ethereum risk levels, right? If you look at the risk levels on ETH, normally what happens is Ethereum goes to the 0.3 to 0.4 risk band when ETH Bitcoin breaks down and bottoms. And you can see that it did it in 2016, it did it in 2019 right here, and then it also just did it in 2025. The only way that Ethereum goes lower on its USD pair from here is if we have a recession. You can see in 2016, 2017, no recession. That's all Ethereum had to get. 2019, it rallied, and we had a recession, right? And it went lower. Here we are in 2025. It's hard to say, right? It's really hard to say. There's a couple of things I've been following, though. If you look at the year-to-date ROI of Ethereum, does 2025 look like 2024? Not really, right? Does it look like 2023? Nope. Does it look like 2022? I mean, there's some similarities, but 2018, I mean, it's tracking 2018 pretty closely, which is kind of scary to some degree. So that's why I'm saying I would like to see Ethereum break out of this structure that it's in, because if it can't, it goes lower. But here's the thing. If Ethereum goes lower at this point, I think it's only because it's a left translated cycle and you have a recession. I think Ethereum has bled enough on its Bitcoin pair and its USD pair to where it should go up. The only reason it won't is if Bitcoin puts in a lower high and then goes down to a lower low. We also had a period like that in the last cycle, where last cycle ETH Bitcoin bottomed right here. That's where ETH Bitcoin bottomed, but ETH USD went lower for a little while because Bitcoin went lower, right? Not because ETH was bleeding against Bitcoin, ETH was going up against Bitcoin, but because Bitcoin was bleeding, it took Ethereum lower. So the only way that ETH goes lower at this point is if Bitcoin goes lower. But because I think there's a decent chance that ETH Bitcoin is bottomed, I think that having some ETH in my portfolio, especially when it went home, made sense.